Hello, my name is Justin Kraus. I am a sophomore here at the University of North Florida. This is the Comparative Politics case study assignment. I will be talking about my case study, which is India, today, and hopefully this will make some sense. India's pre-modern history. We're going to start by looking at India and what it meant prior to being a British possession. And before India really received any influence from the West, it was marauding Muslims that really controlled what culture came into and out of India. India, for the most part, was pretty isolated from world contact, but Muslims from the West and the North came in and pretty much put a stop to that. One of the most famous was the Mughal Empire. In the 1700s, they collapsed under their own weight, and India was able to regain much of its old territory, but that made an opening for the British to come in. The British East India Company was the group that decided to come in and monopolize India and sort of bring a lot of modern technology at the time to India and what it was. Um, the British, however, were tired of the incessant rebellions from much of India's people, despite the fact that a lot of the military they had there was actually native Indians themselves that were well paid and were happy to receive the gunpowder and such. But in 1858, India's government changed hands and the British completely took control. And historically, this has been a good thing for India, but it wasn't going to last. Now, India, following World War II, had really seen a lot of what the world was capable of, but the British really weren't capable of holding on to this much land, and India became quickly the most famous example of decolonization around the world. Mahatma Gandhi was somewhat of a Hindu monk. He was a very peaceful man, but he really didn't want India to end up in a bloody revolution, and it had been tried before, but without success. So he advocated for peaceful rebellion from the British, really just going on strike, not working for their British overlords, and it ultimately worked in 1947. But unfortunately, not everyone was satisfied by this arrangement, and the Muslim population in particular was sort of isolated to the northwest quadrant of India, which became Pakistan. This was former Indian land, had been for centuries, but this was also where the bulk of the Muslim population was. And today we see the results. Throughout the 1960s and 1990s, India was really stuck in a bad spot. It had a lot of enemies, particularly from Pakistan and eventually China. And there were a lot of internal bits of strife too between much of the minority religions there, not just the Muslims, but also the Buddhists, the Jainists, and the Sikh. In fact, the Sikh orchestrated the assassination of Indira Gandhi in the 1980s, which was carried out by her own bodyguards. This was after she had retaliated for Sikh strikes in their province of Punjab, which created much turmoil in the region. Unfortunately for the Sikh, this was met with hostile reaction, and much of Sikh sites in that area were burned to the ground. However, the democracy survived a lot of this strife, and by the 1990s the economy was beginning to look up. Unfortunately, this was sort of preeminent for most of the time, and really wasn't due to any particular democratic strides. As we'll see, India's government really wasn't that incorruptible. There's very widespread corruption throughout it, and as we look at the different branches of the government, you'll see why. Present-day India boasts the second largest population in the world. As of 2011, it's approximated to be 1.2 billion people. And also, because it's a democracy with such a large population, it is technically the largest democracy in the world, which is quite fascinating coming from a place that really doesn't have a lot of nations known for being democratic. But it also benefits from enjoying friendlier relations with the West than any of their neighbors, particularly Pakistan and China, although China has made strides. The economy is set to one day rival China both in size and influence, and this is due really to the population explosion in the region. Not so much that China isn't able to keep up, but India has been gaining ground. The leaders of India, they're a bit confusing because you have two men that could be considered the leader, and in fact, Pranab Mukherjee is India's current president, though he's not the chief executive. What he really does is he appoints different parts of the legislature to what they are, and certain justices on the courts, but he doesn't have any direct executive power, and that goes to the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, who holds all executive powers, though the Prime Minister has yet to be inaugurated, so we'll have to see whether or not he's an effective replacement. The Parliament of India is extensively modeled after the British. This is due to the fact that the British are very responsible for much of the framework that was left after they left. And of all the things the Indians adopted from the British, government was perhaps the most significant. Now, two houses exist in the Parliament. The Council of States is the upper chamber, while the House of the People is the lower chamber. The upper chamber is known as the Rajya Sabha, though a lot of their positions are largely appointed, and very few are elected. This group does have more power than the Lok Sabha, which is the House of the People. That group has 545 members, while the upper house has 245. So it's actually larger than the US government, if you think about it. There are two major political parties that have great power in this structure here. There's the Indian National Congress, which was really the forerunner from what Mahatma Gandhi had instituted after he managed to get India independent. And then there's the BJP, which is the Bharatiya Janata Party. This is a group of Hindu nationalists that really seek to expel and eliminate much of the interests of the minority religious populations, particularly the Muslims, in India's government. Well, it's fair to say that the Hindu population is dominant. The lower ethnicities really don't have as much power as they could. And the Hindu population makes sure that this stays the case. Although the the Indian Congress or Parliament is very, very corrupt. In fact, India is regarded as one of the most corrupt nations in the world for that very reason. Although there have been signs that will change. In particular, the Supreme Court of India is seen as the most capable arm of the government. Despite the fact that many of their justices are appointed, this is due primarily to them getting more done than your typical Supreme Court. They have a lot of power, and that is exerted most prominently through the fact that there are 30 Supreme Court justices. If we think that 9 Supreme Court justices in the US is difficult to get along with anything, imagine 30. But it's 30 plus 1, and the Supreme Justice, the Chief Justice of India, is able to really rile them up and get whatever they want pushed through. A lot of it is a secular agenda, which would seem odd in India, but it has also brought about a lot of the changes to the caste system, as we'll see. The regional differences in India, this comes a lot from which part of India you're from. The northern area is really the region that has the most population and most diversity, and also, consequently, has the most agriculture. Since it's next to some of the tallest mountains in the world, that has created a very fertile region to push the agriculture of India. And this, of course, has made it very competitive with Pakistan and China. Pakistan, of course, is a former part of India, and they still have differences even today. But there's a region that separates Pakistan from China that India supposedly controls, though it is very much disputed, called the Kashmir region. This region is up in the upper Himalayas and is mostly underpopulated. But because this region separates China from Pakistan, China has very much an interest in making whatever little gains they can. However, India boasts the 8th largest military in the world, so it's unlikely that they're going to back down from China. Now, the Indian GDP is estimated to be $5.3 trillion, which is the third highest in the world. The Indian rupee is the local currency and seems to be pretty successful thus far. The divorce rate is also extremely low, and this may be due to the caste system, which is very much prevalent within Hindu society, of which it makes up over 80% of the Indian population, though that does leave out a lot of people. This system is India's biggest obstacle to a completely modern lifestyle, and this is really due to the fact that if you're born into the lower castes, you really can't get out of it, and it's a mark from birth. And, of course, most people fall into the lower castes. However, India is rather striking in that it is a technology center of the world. It quickly modernized and is really surpassing England, its former master, in terms of its technological prowess. Because of India's status as a state language, India is an attractive location for international business. In particular, you've got people from Europe that have high taxation coming to India because not only are the taxes there lower across the board, but it's easy to start up a business in a very exotic locale since English is a state language. But India's economy is stagnant because it is stuck to agriculture, which makes up a larger part of its economy than most developing nations. Also, Bollywood is India's film industry. It's sort of a riff off Hollywood, but it also does the similar things to Hollywood. So the name sort of stuck. And India's film industry is likely the second biggest rival in the world to Hollywood. India's future is likely to be dominated by war, probably with China, though it is unlikely. The Russian relations with India are also striking in that a lot of their technology sector comes from Russian trade. And what I mean by that is the fact that Russia and India really share mutual neighbors. They have Pakistan, Afghanistan, and a bunch of these other smaller developing nations that separate them. And because their technology is better than those nations combined, it really makes them attractive superpowers for the region. And it's projected that India will overtake China in total population, though many suspect that it'll take longer than 2050 to achieve that. But China hasn't been able to keep up with India's fast population growth thanks to India's abundance of arable land. And some of the largest cities, as a side note, in India are Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, and Pune. And this is due to the fact that so many of India's regions that are populated actually are not next to the coast at all, unlike China. Because China is extremely mountainous, India is more arable, and there are far more rivers running through India than China. This means that China is likely to be surpassed by India, though whether or not their military is up to the Chinese threat is difficult to ascertain. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope this has been informative, and I look forward to the rest of the semester. Thank you.